Welcome, curious minds, to the deep dive. Today, we're embarking on really an exhilarating journey into the very fabric of our language. Have you ever paused to consider the words you use every single day? Words that seem so straightforward, so ingrained, maybe like sad, sorrowful, unhappy, right? Simple enough. But what if I told you that centuries ago, sad carried meanings almost the complete opposite meanings, like sated or firm? That surprising twist is just, well, a hint of the linguistic shapeshifting we're about to uncover. Our mission on this deep dive is to take a foundational source, the Oxford Dictionary of Word Histories, and really unearth the fascinating nuggets of insight it holds. We're going to peel back the layers on the hidden lives of common words, revealing the surprising, often circuitous journeys they've taken through time. Get ready for some genuine aha moments, because we're about to make you effortlessly well-informed about the profound history embedded in everyday speech.
Indeed. And what's truly remarkable is that words are far from static labels. They're really not. They are dynamic capsules carrying centuries of human experience, cultural shifts, historical events, even specific anecdotes. Every time you speak, you're often invoking this incredibly rich, multi-layered past without even realizing it. Our deep dive today is precisely about exploring these incredible etymological journeys, understanding not just what a word means now, but how and why it came to hold that meaning. It's a bit like a linguistic archaeological dig, and we're here to unpack some truly extraordinary finds for you, revealing the deep connections between language and the human story. So let's begin this linguistic adventure by looking at how some words, over centuries, undergo these incredible transformations. They often completely shed their original meaning or gain entirely new ones. It's like watching a word perform a kind of semantic shapeshift, adapting and evolving with the societies that use them.
It's astonishing how a single word can have what feel like multiple personalities across different eras. It really can. And as you mentioned, these aren't just random occurrences, are they?
Not at all.
These semantic shifts often reflect profound changes in society, in technology, in our collective consciousness, or even in the way we perceive emotions. We're going to see some striking examples from our sources that highlight just how dynamic and, well, responsive language truly is.
Exactly. And let's dive right into that word we just teased, sad.
Hmm.
Today, it unequivocally brings to mind feelings of sorrow or unhappiness, no question. But if we go back to its Old English root, said, the meaning was strikingly different, really quite different. Our source tells us it meant sated, as in having had enough, satisfied, or even weary. And perhaps most surprisingly, it also carried the meaning of weighty or dense. This word is of Germanic origin, closely related to the Dutch sat and German sat, all stemming from an ancient Indo-European root that's also shared by the Latin satis, meaning enough.
Okay, that's a significant conceptual leap right there. From being sated or enough to sorrowful. How does a word make that kind of journey? Does it suggest a fascinating evolution where being full in a literal sense, perhaps, to the point of being weighed down physically, shifted to feeling heavy in spirit?
Yes.
It implies a powerful metaphorical extension.
You've hit on a key linguistic mechanism there, which is conceptual metaphor. It happens all the time. The journey of sad through Middle English is particularly illustrative of this. The original meaning of being sated or full did eventually give way. One theory is that sated could lead to weary, being so full of something that you become tired or heavy from it. From there, the sense of heavy or dense became important. The word then took on new senses. Initially, it evolved to mean steadfast or firm, often implying a sense of gravity or solidness. The source even cites a powerful example from Milton's Paradise Lost, where he writes, "Settled in his face, I see sad resolution and secure." Think about that for a moment. Sad resolution here doesn't mean sorrowful. It means firm, unwavering, resolute, a deep, unshakable determination. This use aligns with that weighty or solid earlier meaning.
So a person with sad resolution was firm in their convictions, not downcast. That's a complete flip from our modern understanding, just totally different.
Precisely. From firm, it further evolved to mean serious or sober, implying a solemn demeanor. We see this in Romance of the Rose. She demurely sad of cheer, describing someone with a serious or dignified expression, not necessarily unhappy. It was only much later in its development that sad acquired the meaning of sorrowful that we primarily associate with it today, completing a remarkable journey from physical satiety and firmness to emotional grief.
Wow. And just when you think you've grasped it, the sources note yet another twist. In the 1980s, sad took on a colloquial, almost ironic meaning. It could mean pitiably dull or uncool. Remember that?
Oh,
You'd
absolutely.
hear someone say, what a sad dress she's wearing, or that party was totally sad. So you have a word that swings from firm and steadfast to sorrowful and then to uncool and pathetic. What does this tell us about how we categorize emotions and, well, social perceptions through language? It's truly remarkable how fluid these meanings can be,
It really is.
reflecting shifts in social trends and generational attitudes.
It highlights how language is a living reflection of prevailing cultural attitudes and even fleeting trends. Words are continually recontextualized. Always. Now, let's move to another word that experienced a startling semantic shift, particularly acquiring a grim association. Scaffold. When we hear this word today, it almost invariably conjures images of execution.
Right, the gallows, a platform for capital punishment. It has a very dark, definitive connotation for many people. Hard to shake that image.
Exactly. But if we look at its Middle English origin, which comes from Anglo-Norman French or Old French, a scaffold originally denoted a purely practical, constructive purpose. It was a temporary platform from which to repair or erect a building. Simple as that.
Like modern construction scaffolding.
Precisely, which is still a direct descendant of this original meaning.
So originally it was a tool for creation, for building upwards, for repair and progress. That's a profound contrast to what it became. How did such a tool of construction become so inextricably linked with death?
Absolutely. And here's where it takes that dark turn. Around the mid-16th century, the word shockingly came to be used for a platform for the execution of criminals. While it retained its structural meaning of a raised platform, it adopted this incredibly grim, definitive secondary meaning. The linguistic shift here reflects a societal change in how public executions were conducted and perceived. These platforms, initially built for pragmatic reasons, became symbols of ultimate state power and, well, justice, as it was then. The word itself didn't change its form, but its psychological and cultural impact became profoundly different, transforming from an instrument of creation and restoration into an instrument of state-sanctioned death. It's a powerful illustration of how human actions and historical events can fundamentally alter the emotional and conceptual weight of a word.
That's chilling, the way a word can absorb such a definitive, somber purpose. Really makes you think. And speaking of words with graphic origins, let's talk about a pair that are deeply, almost viscerally connected in their etymology. Sarcasm and sarcophagus.
This is a truly striking example of a shared root yielding two very different yet equally impactful outcomes. Sarcasm, which entered English around the mid-16th century, comes through French and Latin, ultimately from the Greek sarkasmos. This Greek word meant gnash the teeth or speak bitterly, okay. But what's truly crucial for understanding its depth is that sarkazine, the verb form, earlier meant something far more literal and brutal, tear flesh, from sarx, sark meaning flesh.
Wow. Kier flesh.
Yeah.
So when you deliver a cutting, bitter remark or truly sarcastic comment, you are, etymologically speaking, tearing flesh with your words. That's an incredibly vivid and almost violent metaphor for verbal cruelty. It makes me reconsider how I use the word, honestly.
It absolutely should. It underscores the raw, almost physical impact that words can have. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the same Greek root, sarx for flesh, is also the origin of sarcophagus, which arrived in English in the late Middle Ages. Sarcophagus comes from the Greek sarkophagos, meaning flesh-consuming. It's formed from sarx, flesh, and phagos, meating. Simple as that. Flesh-eating. It was originally used to describe a specific type of limestone known as Assos stone, reputed among the Greeks to actually consume flesh, thereby speeding up the decomposition of bodies placed within.
So they believe the stone itself ate the flesh.
That was the belief, yes. Hence, its use for a stone coffin.
Wow. So both sarcasm and sarcophagus share this Greek root of flesh, but they manifest in two profoundly different ways. The biting, flesh-tearing nature of verbal cruelty and the literal flesh-consuming nature of a coffin. It really paints a vivid picture of how visceral ancient language could be, connecting abstract concepts like wit to intensely physical actions and even the process of death. That's a truly powerful connection.
It is. It reminds us that often the most potent words have these very concrete, sometimes shocking origins deeply embedded within them. Now let's turn to a word that's deeply tied to social dynamics and aspiration, often with a hint of disdain. Snob.
Snob, someone who thinks they're superior, often by imitating those with higher status or by looking down on others. We all know the type, maybe.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is its late 18th century origin. It was originally a dialect word for a cobbler or shoemaker.
A cobbler, really?
Yes, its precise origin remains unknown, but early census conveyed a notion of lower status or rank, or someone who was not a gentleman. It only later evolved to describe a person seeking to imitate people they perceived as superior in social standing or wealth, or one who despises those of lower status or less fashionable taste. This reflects a shift in focus from who you all, a cobbler, to how you act, pretentious.
And there's that very popular folk etymology, isn't there? The one that tries to link snob to the Latin sign nobilitate, meaning without nobility, supposedly found on university registers for commoners. It's a great story. Sounds very plausible.
It is a great story, and it's incredibly persistent, but it's completely unfounded. Our source explicitly debunks it. It states that the first recorded sense of snob, as cobbler, has no connection to this Latin phrase, nor is there any evidence of its use on university rolls. Just none. This is a classic example of what linguists call folk etymology, where an unfamiliar or obscure word or part of a word is reshaped to resemble a more familiar word or phrase, often creating a plausible but incorrect narrative to explain its origin.
Right, like our brain's trying to make sense of something.
Exactly. It's our brain trying to make sense of something unfamiliar by connecting it to something it already knows. We like neat stories.
So our brains are essentially making up plausible-sounding stories to explain words, even if they're completely wrong. It's a reminder of how easily false etymologies can emerge, and how words, like snob, can encapsulate both social aspiration and critique. It makes you think about how our perception of social hierarchy impacts the very words we use to describe each other, and how we love a good, neat explanation, even if it's not true.
It truly does. Now, let's shift gears a bit from words that dramatically change meaning to words that are like linguistic time capsules, carrying specific historical nuggets and cultural echoes within their very structure. These words tell a story simply by existing.
These are some of my favorite discoveries. Words that literally embed a famous name, a moment in history, or a distinct cultural practice within their very sound. They're like direct links to the past, reminding us how the everyday language we speak is just steeped in history.
They absolutely are. And the first one we're going to dive into is a culinary staple enjoyed by millions every day, sandwich. We all know what a sandwich is, but do you know where the name comes from? Beyond just the Earl, the actual story.
I vaguely recall a story about the Earl of Sandwich and his gaming table. Is that where the name truly comes from? Or is that another folk tale?
No, you're spot on. That one's true. The word sandwich dates from the mid-18th century and is, in fact, named after John Montagu, the fourth Earl of Sandwich, who lived from 1718 to 1792. He was a prominent English nobleman and a very dedicated gambler. The famous anecdote, confirmed by our source, is that he supposedly ate food in this form, meat, between two slices of bread so that he wouldn't have to leave the gaming table during his long sessions, thereby not interrupting his play.
Brilliant.
It allowed him to eat without getting his cards or dice greasy or having to use utensils. Convenience.
That's fantastic.
Huh?
So a simple practical need, the desire to not interrupt a high-stakes card game, led directly to the creation of a ubiquitous culinary item that's now known worldwide. It perfectly illustrates how daily life, even something as specific as a nobleman's gambling habits, can intersect with language creation and culinary innovation in surprising ways. It's a testament to convenience literally shaping our lexicon. Amazing.
It truly is. Next up, a word that carries a much darker, yet equally personal historical origin. Sadism.
Okay, this one makes me think of an intense, perhaps cruel and sexually charged personality or behavior. Definitely negative connotations.
And you'd be absolutely right, because it's directly named after a specific individual whose actions and writings shocked society profoundly. Sadism emerged in the late 19th century from the French sadism, and it's derived from the name of der ancien Alphonse François, the Marquis de Sade, who lived from 1740 to 1814. He was a French writer and soldier whose aristocratic career was repeatedly interrupted by long periods of imprisonment for cruelty and debauchery, particularly involving violent sexual acts.
And it was in prison, wasn't it, that he wrote those infamous, often explicit works, the ones people still talk about?
Yes, exactly. While imprisoned, often in the Bastille, he wrote a number of sexually explicit and philosophical works, such as Justine and 120 Days of Sodom. These works vividly describe cruel and often violent sexual practices where pleasure was derived from inflicting pain on others. It was these detailed descriptions of specific behaviors and desires that led directly to the coining of the term sadism to define such conduct. This is a profound example of the lasting impact one individual's extreme behavior and writings can have on our lexicon, providing a specific psychological term that has entered global discourse. It underlines how language can distill complex human pathologies into a single identifying word.
That's a powerful and somber thought, that an individual's life and documented behaviors can leave such a direct, enduring linguistic mark, defining a specific type of human cruelty. Now let's explore a phrase that carries some specific historical and frankly politically charged baggage. Scarlet woman.
Yes, this phrase, Scarlet Woman, arose in the early 19th century. It was originally applied, sometimes as Scarlet Lady, as a derogatory reference to a woman perceived as morally corrupt or a prostitute. What's critical here, however, is its specific historical and biblical allusion. The phrase directly alludes to a passage in Revelation 17 in the Bible, which describes the great harlot, Babylon the Great, depicted as sitting on a scarlet beast.
Right. And this wasn't just a general slur, was it? It had a very targeted historical application, particularly during periods of religious conflict, as I understand it.
Precisely. In certain Protestant traditions, particularly during and after the Reformation, this biblical imagery was interpreted as a metaphorical representation of the Roman Catholic Church. The Scarlet Woman became a derogatory label used by those who perceived the Roman Catholic Church as being corrupt, worldly, and devoted to showy rituals and temporal power, diverging from what they considered true Christian doctrine. The term, therefore, carried a strong negative theological and political charge in that specific historical and religious context. Very loaded.
And it's crucial to clarify for our listeners that we are impartially reporting on the historical origin of this phrase, as found in our source material. We are absolutely not endorsing or validating the derogatory viewpoint expressed in its original context.
Absolutely not.
Our aim is simply to convey the ideas contained in the original source, to understand how deeply historical conflicts and religious polemics can imprint themselves onto language, creating terms that carry such specific and often negative historical charges. It's a testament to how language can become a kind of battleground for ideas and beliefs.
Exactly. Language is a reflection of its time and its conflicts, and understanding these origins helps us grasp history, not endorse any particular viewpoint. Moving on, here's a word, or rather a compound, that's deeply embedded in our daily entertainment consumption. Soap opera.
Oh, this one seems pretty clear, right? It has to do with actual soap products, surely.
It does, but the story behind why those two words are linked is quite telling about the early days of broadcast media. It's a great slice of history. The application of the noun soap to a radio or television serial dates definitively from the 1930s. And the reason, as our source notes, is, quote, as a result of early sponsorship of such programs by soap manufacturers. Clear connection. During the Great Depression, radio provided cheap entertainment. Companies producing household goods, particularly soap and detergent manufacturers like Procter & Gamble, Colgate-Palmolive, and Lever Brothers, heavily sponsored these daytime serialized dramas which primarily targeted housewives.
That's fascinating. So these companies, realizing their target demographic was listening at home during the day, effectively used these serialized stories as long-form advertisements. Clever, really.
Very clever marketing.
It's incredible to think how common commercial practices, which seemed so transient at the time, can unexpectedly shape our language and create terms that become such entrenched household names for an entire genre of entertainment. Who would have thought that laundry detergent would give us a television genre? It's almost funny.
It's a perfect linguistic snapshot of early broadcast economics and targeted advertising. These shows were literally the operas in the sense of dramatic serials brought to you by soap companies. And speaking of vivid, slightly gritty imagery, let's talk about stool pigeon.
Stool pigeon, okay. A police informer, someone who betrays others. It sounds a bit old-fashioned now, maybe, but it still conjures up a clear image of duplicity and betrayal. You know exactly what it means.
And its origin is wonderfully and perhaps darkly literal. This late 19th century slang term for a police informer comes directly from an original, much older hunting practice. It refers to the literal use of a pigeon fixed to a stool.
Fixed to a stool.
Well, it was a decoy strategy where a pigeon was tied to a stool, often tethered, and used to attract other wildfowl, which would then be easier for hunters to trap or shoot. The pigeon on the stool served as a lure, effectively betraying its own kind.
Oh, wow. So a literal hunting practice where an innocent bird is manipulated and used to lure others to their demise became a powerful, stark metaphor for human deception and betrayal in a criminal context.
That's a powerful transfer of meaning. It really highlights how our interactions with the natural world or even specific hunting techniques can provide us with such compelling linguistic tools to describe complex human behaviors and, well, moral failings.
It truly does. It's a testament to the power of analogy and observed behavior in language formation. You see something, you apply it metaphorically. Now let's pivot to how English, a language with its Germanic roots, has been profoundly shaped by external influences, making it a rich tapestry of borrowed words, often with surprising connections. These borrowings reveal layers of history, conquest, and cultural exchange.
That's truly the beauty of English, isn't it? It's a bit of a linguistic magpie, constantly borrowing and adapting shiny words from everywhere. And tracing these influences really reveals layers of history, conquest, cultural exchange. You see how spelling, sound, and meaning are shaped by these deep interactions over centuries. It's fascinating.
Absolutely. Let's start with a word that evokes industrial action or purposeful destruction. Sabotage. This word, which arrived in English in the early 20th century, is an English use of a French word, saboter. And saboteur means kick with sabots, or more broadly, willfully destroy.
Okay, and a sabot is a wooden shoe, right? Like the Dutch klompen.
That's right. The word sabot itself has been in English use since the early 17th century, and it's actually a blend of older French words, sabate meaning shoe and botte meaning boot. So the etymological journey suggests the act of sabotage originally referred to disgruntled laborers, perhaps during strikes or industrial disputes, destroying machinery by literally throwing their wooden shoes, their sabots, into the gears or mechanisms to jam them.
Oh, wow.
It was a crude but effective form of industrial action.
That's such a concrete, visceral image. From a physical action kicking or throwing wooden shoes into machinery to a specific, deliberate act of destruction, it shows a powerful blend of literal and figurative violence. And it speaks volumes about the early days of industrialization and labor unrest, embedding that history directly into our vocabulary. A little piece of social history right there.
It certainly does, a vivid piece of social history. And next, let's look at salt and the curious case of the salt cellar. Salt itself is an ancient Old English word, silt, of Germanic origin. It's broadly related to Dutch zout and German salts, and it comes from an even older Indo-European root shared by Latin sal and Greek hals, both also meaning salt. So the core word is very stable and widespread, very old.
And I know souse is related too, like pickled meat.
Yes, that's a good connection. Late Middle English souse, from Old French sous pickle, was initially used for pickled meat, showing that long-standing connection to salt and preservation techniques. But the really curious part is the compound salt cellar. This also dates from the late Middle English period. Its second element, cellar, is actually a linguistic corruption. It's not what you think. The original word was the obsolete sailor, which came from Old French salier, meaning salt box or salt container. And salier itself ultimately came from Latin salarium.
Wait, salarium? As in where we get the word salary from, because Roman soldiers were supposedly paid in salt rations. Is that connection real?
That connection is real, yes, which further illustrates salt's historical value.
So the second part of salt cellar has absolutely nothing to do with a basement or an underground storage space. That's mind-blowing. Completely different meaning.
Not at all. You're right about the salary connection. But for salt cellar, the change in spelling from sailor to cellar was purely due to what we call folk etymology, as we discussed earlier with snob. People heard sailor, it sounded similar to the much more familiar word cellar, and their minds made a connection based on sound, even though etymologically it's completely incorrect.
Just based on sound.
Exactly. This phonetic similarity overrode the original meaning. It's a classic example of how a word's form can be reshaped by popular association, leading to these seemingly illogical spellings that hide a very different history.
It makes you wonder how many other words we use have a hidden misspelling built right into their history, shaped by common perception rather than strict etymological accuracy.
It certainly does.
That's wild. It makes me question everything I thought I knew about seemingly simple words. And speaking of C spellings and Latin influence, let's talk about scissors and scythe. They have surprisingly similar stories about their spelling, don't they?
They do. These two words offer a great insight into how Latin influence can lead to corrective, yet historically inaccurate, spelling changes in English words that have independent Germanic roots, or simply reinforce Latin origins in a new way. Let's start with scissors. This word came into English in the late Middle Ages from Old French cisoires, which ultimately derives from late Latin cisoria, meaning cutting instrument. The prefix cis here is a variant of cas, the stem of Latin cadere, meaning to cut. Okay. The important point is that the spelling was SC occurred in the 16th century, specifically by association with the Latin stem ciscut, which is the past participle stem of cinder to cut. It was an attempt to make the spelling conform more closely to its Latin scholarly roots, kind of tidying it up.
So even though scissors already had a perfectly good Latin root, its spelling was further Latinized, almost as a scholarly embellishment, making it look more Latin.
Exactly. Now compare that to scythe. The word scythe is much older, stemming from Old English scythe, and it's of direct Germanic origin, related to Dutch Zeis and German sense. Etymologically, the correct and original spelling is scythe, S-I-T-H-E. In fact, the famous lexicographer Samuel Johnson preferred the spelling scythe in his dictionary.
He did, but it didn't stick.
No, his preference didn't prevail against the spelling with SC, which, just like scissors, was probably influenced by the Latin verb cinder, also meaning to cut.
So scissors had a Latin root, but its spelling was re-Latinized, and scythe, which had a purely Germanic root, was also Latinized in its spelling, creating this complex linguistic paper trail. It's almost like at a certain point in English history, Latin was trying to retroactively claim all the cutting words, regardless of their actual direct lineage.
Ah, that's a very apt way to put it.
It's a testament to the powerful prestige of Latin in shaping English orthography.
A very apt way indeed. Latin was the language of scholarship and authority for centuries, and its influence permeated every aspect of English. You see it everywhere. And speaking of surprising origins, often with fascinating if debunked stories, let's tackle sycophant.
Sycophant, right? Someone who flatters excessively for personal gain. A brown-noser, often insincerely.
Huh.
A flatterer.
Right. This word arrived in the mid-16th century, initially meaning an informer or slanderer. That was the first sense. It comes from French sycophant, or via Latin from the Greek sukophantes, which also primarily meant informer. Now, there's a popular, very colorful, and often repeated theory about its origin that you might have heard, the fig story.
Yes, so the fig story.
It suggests an association with informing against the illegal exportation of figs from ancient Athens because figs were considered a sacred crop. This story is even recorded by Plutarch, a Greek historian.
That's a great story. Informing on fig smugglers, it gives the word a sort of quirky, very specific historical charm, like a unique ancient crime. Makes it memorable.
It does, and it's precisely why it's so enduring. It's a good story. But, and this is important for a deep dive like ours, our source notes that this explanation is not substantiated by modern etymological research.
Oh, another debunked one.
Yes. While it's a captivating anecdote passed down through history, it likely isn't the true origin. Instead, scholarly consensus suggests the Greek term sukophantes may have referred to an obscene gesture, specifically showing the fig, which was an insulting gesture made with the thumb between two fingers.
Like a really rude gesture.
Exactly. This gesture was considered slanderous, linking the word to the idea of a malicious accuser or slanderer.
Yeah.
Much less charming than figs.
That's quite the pivot.
Hey.
From fig smuggling to an obscene gesture. It really emphasizes the allure of a good story in etymology, even if it's false.
Absolutely.
And the raw, often surprising origins that actual research uncovers. Sometimes the less glamorous or more vulgar truth is even more intriguing because it reveals more about ancient culture and communication.
It certainly is. The messy truth is often more interesting. Finally, in this segment, let's look at how Latin continues to be a living, productive force in English word formation, particularly through its powerful prefixes. Specifically, let's explore the prefixes sub and super. They are incredibly common, but the range of meanings they add is quite impressive when you break it down.
These are like mini lessons in themselves, aren't they? They show how a small, almost invisible addition can completely modify a word's meaning, adding nuance and specificity. They seem so fundamental to English. I use them all the time without thinking.
They absolutely do, and they're incredibly productive, meaning we can still create new words with them today. They're not relics. Take sub, for instance, which comes from the Latin sub, meaning under or close to. It adds several distinct senses to words, creating a rich semantic palette. It can mean, quite literally, lying at, to, or from a lower level, as in subalpine for regions just below the alpine zone of mountains, or submarine for a vessel that operates under the sea. Makes sense. It also signifies lower in rank or subordinate, like a subaltern officer who is below a captain, or subcommittee. Hierarchy. It can denote of a smaller size or a part of a larger whole, as in a subculture that exists within a dominant culture, or a subclass in biology, part of something bigger. It also conveys somewhat or nearly, such as subantarctic climate, meaning almost anarchic or subconscious. Not quite there. Furthermore, it can be indicative of secondary action or a subsequent division, like subletting an apartment where you are re-renting it, or subdivide a property. A second layer. And finally, it can even be indicative of support or assistance, as in a subvention, which is a government grant or subsidy, support from below, maybe.
That's an astonishing amount of meaning packed into 3 letters, from location to hierarchy to nuance. Just incredible versatility. And super is just as powerful, but usually in the opposite direction, right? Implying something beyond the norm, bigger, better.
Precisely. Super comes from Latin super, from super meaning above or beyond. It also brings a formidable range of semantic modifications, often connoting excess or superiority. It means, quite literally, above, over, beyond, as in superstructure, the part of a building above its foundation, or superimpose, placing over. It can indicate to an extreme degree or exceeding, like super abundant for something present in very large quantities, or super fine, really, really abundant or fine. It denotes extra large or great, as in a supercontinent like Pangaea, or a superhighway, big scale. It also signifies having greater influence or capacity, like a superbike with superior performance, or a superpower nation, more power. And finally, it can mean of a higher kind, or ultimate, as in superfamily in biological classification, or superstar, top of the hierarchy.
Wow. So these prefixes allow for incredibly precise semantic modification, showing how Latin continues to be a living, productive force in English word formation. They allow us to build complex meanings from simple building blocks, giving our language incredible nuance and depth. It's like having a linguistic Lego set that constantly expands our ability to describe the world with precision and varied intensity.
A very powerful and versatile Lego set indeed, allowing for both subtle and dramatic shifts in meaning. Now let's transition to our final segment, where we explore words that capture the essence of the human condition, our emotions, our relationships, our place in society, and even our darker impulses. These words often reveal fascinating cultural attitudes or philosophical underpinnings from centuries past, really get to the heart of things.
These are the words that truly connect to our inner lives and social fabric. It's fascinating how language helps us articulate these complex aspects of life, and how their etymologies often reveal deep historical beliefs, from ancient medical theories to societal values that have shaped our understanding of ourselves. So much packed in there.
They do. Let's start with sanguine. Today, if you describe someone as sanguine, you usually mean they're optimistic, hopeful, generally cheerful.
Right, like a sanguine outlook on life, full of positive expectation, maybe a bit naive sometimes, but generally positive.
Exactly. This word from Middle English comes from Old French sanguinis, blood red, which ultimately derives from Latin sanguineus of blood, from sanguis, sanguine blood. So blood is key. But here's the fascinating historical context. In medieval physiology, sanguine was one of the 4 complexions, or temperaments, derived from the ancient Greek theory of the 4 humors. Remember those?
The humors, yes. That old medical theory, which suggested that a person's physical and mental health and even personality were determined by the balance of these 4 bodily fluids: blood, phlegm.
Yellow bile and black bile, that's them. A sanguine person was characterized by the predominance of blood over the other 3 humors.
So having a lot of blood or the right balance weighted towards blood meant you were sanguine.
Exactly. And if you had a sanguine complexion, it was literally believed you would have a ruddy countenance, a healthy reddish glow, and this physical attribute was directly associated with a specific character, a positive, amorous, vigorous, and hopeful temperament. The idea was that a plentiful, well-circulating blood supply indicated vitality and a cheerful disposition, body and mind linked directly.
So it's not just about blood, but a balance of humors that made you sanguine, dictating everything from your appearance to your personality. It's wild how ancient medical theories, which we now know aren't scientifically accurate in the modern sense, so deeply influenced our vocabulary for personality types.
Usually.
And how physical attributes were once thought to directly dictate disposition.
Yeah.
It shows how our scientific understanding, however flawed it seems now, becomes embedded in our everyday language.
It's a great example of how the prevailing scientific and philosophical understanding of a period is woven into its language. You can't separate them. Next, let's consider seethe.
When I think of seethe, I immediately think of someone boiling with anger, internally churning, perhaps suppressing intense rage, like a pot about to boil over.
That's precisely its common modern figurative meaning, but its Old English root, seothon, was very literal. It meant make or keep boiling, just like cooking. It's of Germanic origin, related to Dutch seeden, also meaning to boil or simmer. This physical action of bubbling and churning was its primary meaning for centuries. The powerful leap to the figurative sense, to be in a state of inner turmoil or to be intensely angry but restrained, only dates from the early 17th century. Relatively recent in linguistic terms. Our source even cites Shakespeare's Troilus and Cressida from around 1602. I will make a complimental assault upon him for my business sieves, meaning his anger or his plans are furiously brewing.
That's a wonderfully powerful analogy, connecting a physical state of agitated, bubbling, boiling to an intense emotional one. It truly demonstrates how human emotion, often difficult to articulate directly, is so frequently described in terms of physical phenomena, making abstract feelings more tangible and relatable. The imagery of an internal boil is so vivid you can almost feel it.
A very vivid and enduring metaphor indeed, one that transcends languages. You see similar things elsewhere. Now let's explore the deep and logical relationship between secret and secretary. They seem linked, obviously, but the etymology reveals just how intertwined they are.
They sound connected, yeah. But how deeply does one derive from the other, and what does it tell us about the history of information and roles?
Very deeply, and with a compelling internal logic. The word secret came into English in the late Middle Ages, from Old French, and ultimately from the Latin adjective secretus, meaning separate or set apart. This itself comes from the Latin verb secernere, which means to sift or to separate. If we break secernere down further, it's formed from se apart and cerner to sift. So a secret is fundamentally something that has been sifted apart, something kept separate, hidden, and confidential, deemed worthy of being guarded. Set aside.
Okay, makes sense. And secretary then, how does that fit?
Secretary, also from the late Middle Ages, originally referred very specifically to a person entrusted with a secret. That was the core job. It comes from late Latin secretarius, meaning confidential officer or keeper of secrets, directly from Latin secretum, which is the neuter form of secretus, meaning a secret thing. So the entire evolution makes perfect sense. The idea of separation of information being set apart or confidential directly led to the role of a secretary as someone entrusted with that separated confidential information. Their core function was to guard and manage sensitive communications. Over time, the role expanded to encompass broader administrative duties, of course, but its foundational etymology lies in the careful handling of what is secret.
That's a beautifully clear and logical lineage. The word itself tells the story of a role evolving from its core function of guarding secrets. Fascinating. And now, for a word that carries an incredibly heavy and sobering historical weight. Slave.
Yes. This is a profoundly powerful and sobering example of how historical events, particularly large-scale conquest and ethnic subjugation, directly embed themselves into our everyday language, reminding us of difficult pasts. It's unavoidable. The word slave arrived in Middle English as a shortening of the Old French esclave, which is equivalent to the medieval Latin sklava, a feminine form. Crucially, sklava literally meant Slavonic captive. It referred to a specific people.
So the very word slave tells us about a specific, tragic historical event involving a particular group of people, the Slavonic peoples. That's explicitly in the word.
Exactly. Our source explicitly states that the Slavonic peoples had been reduced to a servile state by conquest in the 9th century. During the early medieval period, a significant portion of the Slavic population of Central and Eastern Europe was enslaved by various conquering powers, particularly Germanic tribes and the Byzantine Empire. This massive historical event, where an entire group of people was subjugated and sold into servitude across Europe, left an indelible mark on our language, to the point where their very ethnonym became synonymous with servitude.
Wow. The verb to slave, meaning to toil away like a slave or to work extremely hard, appeared later in the early 18th century, extending the concept to arduous labor irrespective of actual bondage. It's a stark, enduring reminder of difficult pasts and how the experiences of entire populations become etched into our lexicon, forming a permanent linguistic memorial to a painful history.
It truly makes you pause and reflect every time you hear or use the word. It's a living monument to a profound and painful history, a constant linguistic echo of human injustice. Lastly, let's dive into sympathy, a word that expresses deep human connection, but which took a fascinating and unexpected detour through the supernatural. This is one of my favorites for its unexpected linguistic twists, and it highlights how intertwined our understanding of emotions, science, and belief systems can be. It really shows how ideas flowed. Sympathy appeared in the late 16th century, first used to express understanding between people, or a fellow feeling. It came via Latin from the Greek sympathia, which is beautifully formed from sun meaning with and pathos meaning feeling or suffering, so literally feeling with or suffering with.
That makes perfect sense for its modern meaning of empathy and compassion. Clear connection. So where does this detour into the supernatural come in? That's quite a departure for a word about human connection. Seems odd.
Here's where it gets really interesting and reflects an earlier worldview. In the mid-17th century, the adjective sympathetic, following the pattern of words like pathetic or magnetic, joined this group of related words. And for a significant period, it meant relating to a paranormal influence, often implying a mysterious non-physical connection between distant objects or persons, like action at a distance, but magical. The source even cites the phrase sympathetic magic as a clear illustration of its use in this context.
Right.
Sympathetic magic refers to a type of magical ritual where an effect is produced on someone or something by manipulating an object that is associated with them through a perceived sympathetic connection. You know, the lock of hair, an effigy, or an item they once touched.
Sympathetic magic.
Ooh.
That's incredible. So a word meaning feeling with or shared feeling temporarily veered into the realm of spells, charms, and mystical connections at a distance, almost like a precursor to our understanding of electromagnetism, but on a magical plane. Then it eventually returned to its more common emotional meaning. It highlights the historical interconnectedness of evolving scientific understanding, popular belief, and human emotion, and how our understanding of the world, both the physical and the mystical, influence the very language we use to describe it.
It's a wonderful example of language being a mirror to changing worldviews, showing us how abstract concepts can take unexpected turns before settling into the meanings we recognize today. Language adapts.
What an incredible journey we've taken through the etymological landscape today. Really quite something. From words that completely flip their meaning over centuries, like sad, to those that hold specific historical anecdotes within their very sound, like sandwich or sadism,
To how borrowed influences shape our spelling and understanding of categories, like salt cellar or scissors. And finally, to how our language captures the very essence of the human condition, both the bright, like sanguine, and the very dark, like slave. It truly shows that everyday words are far from simple. They're bustling metropolises of surprising history, cultural insights, and fascinating linguistic evolution. Our understanding of the world, and indeed of ourselves, becomes so much richer, more nuanced, and more connected to the past when we take this kind of deep dive into its language.
Absolutely. Reinforcing that idea, language is truly a living archive, a constantly evolving historical document. Every word is a microhistory waiting to be explored. Once you start looking, you'll find these historical echoes everywhere, whether in the reason a certain word sounds like it does, or why its meaning seems to twist and turn through time, sometimes in surprising, sometimes in unsettling ways. Knowing these origins not only makes you more informed, but also deepens your appreciation for communication itself and the incredible, often surprising legacy carried in every sentence you speak and hear. So, to leave you with a thought to mull over, considering how many words started with very literal physical meanings like sculpture, originally meaning hollow out, or, as we learned today, sarcasm, meaning tear flesh, how much of our abstract thought is still unconsciously rooted in, or perhaps even limited by, our physical experience? Are we still thinking physically, even when we think abstractly?
That's a deep one.
Or, given how words like snob and secretary have radically changed their social meaning and connotations over time, what might some of our most common words today mean to people in 200 years? How might they judge our current usage, our slang, our everyday terms?
Incredible questions to ponder as you go about your day. Really makes you think differently about language. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the hidden histories and surprising evolutions of language. We hope you feel a little more connected to the incredible tapestry of words we use every single day, and that maybe you're inspired to do some linguistic digging of your own. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive.